Welcome to our 100 episode.
Yes.
Whoa.
And we have David Tian back again.
Yeah, hi everyone, I'm back.
Yeah, David, you joined us for our 31st August discussion, right? So
Yeah.
now we already kind of preview part 2. We want to talk about 16th of September. But just now we're just talking, right, that the general awareness of 16th of September is still not that great,
Yes.
even especially in Semenanjung. And now, David, I want to start with you. Maybe you can share from your point of view, why is that so? And I remember the last episode, you also mentioned that you were somewhat influenced by the S4S, Sarawak for Sarawakian kind of movement. So maybe just share a little bit, like from your point of view. Because I would say when we were young in primary school, I'm not sure about Lyra, but secondary school, even for us, Sarawakian at that time, we have no awareness of Malaysia Day.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
I think for the concept of Malaysia Day, is start for my background is start from after Najib announcing the 16th of September is the public holiday. But look back from the history. Actually, the Sarawak nationalism, this kind of movement is always there. Because just now before the recording, we're talking about after the formation of this federation, after May 13, and after all the emergency, blah blah blah. After all, it's all different as promised by our ancestors. So, for my information, that time there's a party SUPP. They fight for independence in a more violent way. They really want to go into war, independence war kind of things. And after that, after another emergency in Sarawak, especially for in Sarawak, in the 90s, 70s, then they settle. They say, okay, we want peace. We don't want to fight for independence. We cannot fight against you. Then they give up. They surrender their weapons. Then this is the first wave, I guess. And in the 80s, actually, Sabah, there's a nationalism movement as well. We know that there's people, Jeffrey Kidingan, he is a very vocal nationalist in Sabah to fight for independence. And because of that, he jailed in the prison.
Yep.
And now we can see he is more kind of opportunist, but back then, he is a very vocal kind of independence fighters. So I think at the same time, Sarawak got this kind of wave, but it's all covered or somehow ignored by us because of all the political hoo-ha. We have the civil war in the Sarawak Barisan Nasional. Then people forget that. And after the totalitarian rules in Sarawak by what is the name? The uncle of Taib, Yaakob. Then people sort of forget of this kind of things. But actually it's all still there. There's still the voice are there. Then we have two strong men, Taib and Rahman Yaakob. And only after Taib, then we have the independence movement again. So actually if we look at that cycle, it's actually still it's like they are there along the history, just whether they are vocal or they are not vocal. Because if we look back at the history, Sarawak is not treated equally. This is a fact. But I always strengthen that we need to look at the future. We cannot look at the past. But how do we heal our trauma? And how do we reconcile? This is the point we need to strengthen.
And very, very good, interesting kind of preview, because if we want to look at history, so many things we can look at it, right? But I totally agree with you that we want to look to the future and how we can move forward. But of course, in order to move forward, we have to go back and kind of at least have some consensus. I don't think we can get 100% agreement. In fact, today PMS is in Kota Kinabalu. And announcing 300 million, and sounds like a lot of money, but actually in the scheme of the whole thing, what's the word they use? Interim payment. Every time you use the word interim payment, it's like, let's say you're fighting for an inheritance, and then it's like, okay all the children get 1 million first. Then everyone will be like, okay, happy for a while, but actually there are billions to be distributed, or trillions. So interim in a commercial world, we know it's like just give you a few cents and hopefully the dots will go away. But like what I want to ask you, because we have been looking at Malaysia agreement, and one of the interesting thing that is really when Singapore left, right? And the I think Prime Minister at that time called a session, and Singapore member didn't even turn up, and just have a constitutional amendment. I think bracket Singapore they are leaving. And one of the, of course, there are many discussions there, but one of the interesting thing, maybe you want to read. So this is a portion of speech given by Ong Kee Hui, right, the founder of SUPP, which I think can really maybe set the tone in terms of what we want to discuss today: self-determination and decentralization.
Yeah, I mean, he did mention this, but I think what was very, very interesting was when we were just looking through this whole Malaysia Agreement 1963, and when it came to that point where the Prime Minister was just announcing to the whole Parliament members, and he was just basically saying that this may come as a surprise. Obviously, it's a surprise, though.
Very big surprise.
Seriously, I mean, a lot of them, they were like, hey, we just reached here from like East Malaysia, and then you dropped this bomb on us, and you are expecting us to pass the bill like almost like immediately. So there were a lot of unhappiness that was raised, and especially by Ong Kee Hui as well, that he was just basically saying that what would be the position of the Borneo states if at some future date perhaps we have a government in charge which is not so reasonable or so pliable to alliance direction from the center. So would not be the same reason then be advanced for further partition of Malaysia. So I thought it was quite interesting because from that perspective, he was just saying about, hey, we were not being consulted first, and then now you drop this bomb expecting us to pass the whole thing, and then you say, but it's interesting that he said, what if we have someone else that is basically a tyrant? That later on comes in, and what are we going to do? I mean, we're like defenseless. And there is also, like what David was mentioning, also the emergency proclamation that was declared over Sarawak. Basically, you give people no response, no time to respond at all. So all this thing is like an incident after another incident. It's almost like going back to COVID era as well, that you have this, then people are just so conditioned to taking vaccine. And even with now, with the rise of flu season, people are like also just conditioned to this whole thing. But if you really look at monkeypox, hey, I mean, if you're not sexually active, and if it's homosexual kind of relationship, then you should be quite well protected, you know? So, but people are just sort of like conditioned to think that, hey, I also need to quickly get a vaccine because of this. And hey, influenza has been around for like the longest time, and also people are like just being conditioned to think that I will need to just have this sort of really just going back to where I need to take vaccine. So there's a lot of groupthink that I felt like we were just being conditioned, even back at that time in the parliament time where Malaysia was supposed to be a rainbow nation. Malaysia was supposed to be founded based on the basis that it's a multicultural sort of basis, and all of us come here together. But since day one, there has always been that race-based parties that have been formed after another, and then before long, you realize that, hey, everyone is just being partitioned or categorized to a different kind of setup where it's almost like the communal, your own cultural setting has to be like maintained. So no one else is supposed to toe the line.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at overall what happened after World War II, the retreat of British all around the world. I mean, look at India, Pakistan, look at many African states. The division wasn't ideal. But of course, people tend to want to remain in their culture, you know. And I think that is a reasonable kind of thing. But of course, the whole constitution, when it was framed, it was supposed to kind of ensure that the country is not dominated by a kind of by a particular race or by a particular religion. one of the main criteria demanded by the Borneo partners. But look at where we are today, which is obviously not happening. But of course, you have some parties in Malaysia that continue to allege that, there is no domination. But of course, we see the recent halal issue. And I think that's one of the things that a lot of people, like, they say, don't rock the boat and things like that. But the whole discussion is, if you kind of mandate every restaurant, every eatery that doesn't sell pork or alcohol to have that certificate. I am not a Muslim, but my business, you determine who can come to my business. So that is affecting non-Muslim. And I think people don't quite see this kind of discussion being taken out. Of course, this is all part of our self-determination, decentralization. Do we want, at the end of the day, do we want government to have more say, right? You know, like, can you imagine, like, government say what car you can drive? You know, like we talked about bus lane the other day. It's like, basically we can see what the council is trying to do is encourage people to use. You can encourage people, but you can't force people, right? But that's the thing that is the trend that is happening. But anyway, we kind of sidetrack a little bit. We want to come back to the whole point about. So you mentioned a very good point about Ong Ki Hui. He mentioned, what if a tyrant step in, and in fact we experience tyrant, right?
Yeah.
And of course, to say, we're not saying that Tunku Abdul Rahman or Razak or Mahathir, of course, all have their demonstration of strawman demonstrations. Of course, Lee Kuan Yew later on in Singapore also same, right? But we just remember we did one episode many months or years ago during the COVID time, and when Muhyiddin declared emergency, we said that was maybe the 5th or 6th emergency in the country. But there were 4 or 5, and it all happened in the 60s, 70s. David, you were just alluding. But it's almost like, okay, this is just my thought, and I want both of you to comment. It's almost like when Singapore left, and Ong Ki Hui is like, hey, we also might want to leave. And later on, Chief Minister of Sarawak at that time, Kalon Ningkan, also expressed the same thing.
Yeah.
And in fact, the word referendum was thrown around. But of course, very soon, there were people kind of gathered to oppose him, whether it was federal or not. We don't want to speculate. But it's like, then of course, you have emergency before May 13. Then you have actual May 13, which Parliament didn't meet for years. Then after that, more emergency confrontation with Indonesia. Then before long, it's 70s already. And we have NEP, and then we have the constitutional amendment to make Sabah and Sarawak lesser, to become part of the states also. Then SUPP finally joined government. So it's almost like, okay, so my question to both of you will be, it feels like, it's like there are powers that just basically kind of make, it is a very pushy kind of power that cause people to not be able to think. And eventually they just say, okay lah, let's just relent with it. And a lot of people from that generation seems to be very fearful of a repeat of May 13. So they are like, okay lah, whatever government say. So I think just now Lanshi was just talking to me, and she said, oh, you know the constitution was amended many times? Yeah, you know, some scholars say 800 times, some scholars say 3,000 times, depending how you look at it. And the whole fabric is like supposed to be multicultural, and then now you can actually point to constitution and say, well, maybe it's not multicultural. Maybe Islam is supposed to be so prominent, and we can even be a theocracy. You know, someone like Taya Param from Malaysia Kini say we're heading towards theocracy. So what's your response to all this? I'm talking about, now I know we don't want to dwell too much on the past, but people must see what has happened in order for us to come to at least some consensus.
No, I think when you mentioned about the part where Malaysian constitution has been changed so many times, I thought it was very interesting, because that was the exact same argument that was being brought out when Tun Hussein On presented a bill that basically downgraded Sabah and Sarawak. I'm not saying that, I'm not discounting the fact that the Sarawakian and Sabahan MPs, they also played a huge part in also contributing and passing the law. But the thing is, it was the very same argument, because he started off with this whole speech and just saying that, hey, some of you might be thinking that it is like American Constitution where you don't get to amend it so many times, but here we need to have a very progressive bill. So I felt like it was, in a way, you kind of, when you think about it, there has always been that sort of elitist establishment mindset from day one, that we need to stay in tune with the timings of the world, in line with what is the happening of where we are going through. And because of that, it justifies us changing all this thing to make us a bit more inclusive. So I think even back then, if you really think about it, the critical race theory has always been like the fundamental of Malaysia Constitution, because that almost became like, hey, because of this, let's just put this one in. Let's have all the states becoming the same. But the fact is, when Sabah Sarawak joined in, the law clearly stated that it is Borneo states, namely Sabah and Sarawak. And then you have Singapore as well. So with that, I think there has always been that sort of intention, and all this thing happened after May 13. So I felt like it's very systematic way of really just conditioning people not to fight for their freedom. But when in fact, when you encroach too much into the freedom and people don't really have any right to think about anything at all, hey, you are becoming more like communist. I mean, you're becoming more like a tyrant altogether, authoritarian. So basically, that is that sort of foundation that I felt like it has caused the whole nation to skew towards just being race, and we just look at the skin color, when in fact I don't think it was that sort of design from day one. I don't think British would have foreseen it at all, because the counter argument to that part where it justifies the changing of the parliament, the laws. So the other side was just saying that, hey, you look at British, I mean, they don't even have a written constitution, yet that doesn't mean that they can continuously just change here and there, you know. Even with that, they were very, very honorable in saying that, hey, it is when the Prime Minister does not have a command of majority, you should be honorable to just step down. So in the same case, even with the Singapore living as well, I mean, by right, the Prime Minister should probably also lost a large sense of command of majority. So by right, there should be a right to go for election again and just test out the vote. So that was also that sort of argument. So I felt like in a lot of ways, people are just like too scared to be spooked, and therefore let's just don't worry about so much of this. But before long, we realized that, hey, we have been pandering too much to I mean, even our freedom of religion is being eroded altogether. Yes, Islam is the official religion, but it also says clearly in Article 3 that all other religions are supposed to practice it freely. And so that means you shouldn't be saying how we should behave in the houses of worship and how we should be even eating now and how we're doing businesses based on your set of rules. So it doesn't work that way. I mean, everyone has to be able to think one way or the other what you want to do. I mean, if I don't want to eat it, I mean, I'm fine. But I mean, what they are saying is that it looks like they are controlling a certain group by saying that we need them to be more aware so that they don't go into the wrong places. But in fact, you are really also encroaching into all the other races' rights.
Yeah, that's what Rafida Aziz was saying just yesterday, right? I mean, when she was commenting on the whole issue, it's like, I mean, she herself being a Muslim say, we don't want the government to use religion to progressively erode our right. You know, she say it like that. I mean, it's like you think about what Teresa Kok said and what she said. It's like what she said is even more 3R, right? so that's why the whole thing with Teresa is just ridiculous. But David, I want to ask you this because coming from what Lyra had just said, you know, when we look at going back again when Singapore left, and remember what happened will be Galong Ninggang wanted to take Sarawak out and then he was challenged. You know, he lost his majority. But instead of resigning, he said he had the right to dissolve the House. Yeah. And this fight went all the way to Privy Council, and Privy Council at that time is like a international Commonwealth Court, which is above our Supreme Court even. So Privy Council ruled in favor of him and said that as a chief minister, he has a right to dissolve if he felt like he lost confidence. So that was a law until Perak case. Of course, it's a different thing. Now, David, I want to ask you, do you feel like, because all these things and they kept using emergency, they took away local elections, do you feel like, I'm talking about the alliance, which is UMNO, MCA, MIC, that after Singapore left, they did everything possible under the book to remain in power. And the way to do that will be to continue to bring more power to the central government.
What you have said made me think back to the time when UMNO win big in the local election. MCA and MIC, they joined together, become an alliance, but coincidentally.
Yeah, they were not even friends, right?
Yeah, they're not even friends. Like MCA at that time is just like a NGO to help the Chinese, and suddenly UMNO seems like good, friendly to be. Then they form a country. In the point of view of they safeguard their power, I think if we don't look at the perspective that they want to sideline Sarawak, they want to passively let Singapore go. If we look at the point of they safeguard the power, actually is explainable. Because back in 1946, because I do some research regarding to Malayan Union, because I kind of curious why from Malayan Union become Malayan Federation. Because after British announced that there's a Malayan Union which is very friendly with the outsiders, so-called outsiders, with the Chinese, with the Indians, then some of the people, which is the king, which is the Malay nationalists, they feel so insecure.
Yep.
Then they form UMNO, they go to demonstration that we don't want Malayan Union. After that, they have a negotiation with British. So I think back to the point, when 1946 everything happened, then we can see there's a two group of people start competing each other.
Yep.
That different mindset. This a group of people that they think this is the Tanah Melayu, and a group of people include British. They think, well, why not? This is a rainbow nation. So I think until now, these arguments, these two camp of people still competing with each other.
Yep.
Just that the Malay nationalists kind of like they are more supreme over the other ones.
So far they are winning.
So far they are winning, but
Yeah.
I think we cannot lose hope at the end. But back to the real case of the problem is that why every time of these two group of people competing each other, the other side always losing. This is what made me think, always think about that. Why? Because like Sarawak, they want to independence, suddenly emergency. Because emergency, actually we are just using the Emergency Act to confront communists, but there's no communists at all.
It's being weaponized basically.
In Malaysia. And now many political party, even Chinese, be labeled as communists, but some people, they accusing the other people as communists, but they themselves are more behave like communists. So this keep me pondering, but I didn't have an answer. But I just want to clear my mind. It's like why I want to find an answer. But maybe it's because we are all threatened by the fear. Actually, what if at the moment that the fear is swallowing up the society, but there's someone can break through that fear to share hope that is nothing to fear at all. But I think there's slow progress after we have changed government. Then we have new warfare right now. But I think the fight against the fear is still ongoing.
Very interesting. I mean, so many points you brought out, and of course, I when you talk about fear and why people kind of continue to give in, kind of remind me of what Fahmi recently said, right? That we are looking towards the Eastern culture. So I think if you look at the Eastern culture, which is, I mean, in a very broad sense, are just more compliant, are just more like status quo. We don't want to rock the boat. I think that could be one of the reasons people are fearful, because after all the uncertainty, being under colonial power, under Japanese power, people just want some kind of stability. But it's interesting you brought out the history of Malayan Union because we studied that in history, but one of the things recently I found out also is that we didn't get the full story of Malayan Union in our history book. Because what really happened at that time, you see, this is not unique to Malaysia. In all the nations that British were controlling, they just want to let go very quickly. And so whoever that come up with a good plan, you see, in the end, they decided, okay, we will support the one that is calling for Tanah Melayu, they want to preserve royalty. That's why Tunku Abdul Rahman was invited to go to London. But there was another group competing, and they want, those are more for Rainbow Nation, those are more for a pure secular Malaysia. And of course, obviously, they lost in the sense British didn't choose them. But there was real political competition. I mean, even Singapore in the early days, you have the Workers' Party. That's why now the opposition is Workers' Party. But that was they wanted to use communism because they felt like because at that time they go to communism because they felt it's equity, So that's the whole thing that because of British decision to say, look, we go back to that, we preserve. It all goes back to the Bangkok Accord and things like that. And it's very similar to when American won the World War II. They actually have an opportunity to fully remove Japanese monarchy. They have the option. Because unconditional surrender, whatever the Americans say. And in fact, Truman was not even bothered with that negotiation. He let MacArthur did whatever he wants. Like Truman had his other problem, in Germany, Russia. So MacArthur is just like, with his cigar and things like that. So he just kind of like, okay, the Japanese monarchy can continue. So it's interesting that one or two moments of history kind of impacted us because, I mean, it is what it is. The Constitution put a special privilege, but also safeguard the people. But then, of course, you're asking about why one side is like, it's almost like it's very one-sided, right? In terms of the walk and things like that. Lara, you can comment a little bit, but from my point of view, it is really you talk about Kitingan, Jeffrey Kitingan, and in fact, when they want to nationalize petroleum at that time, remember who was that? Tunku Razali was the one who came. So you know the infamous 66 crash. So a lot of the people, a lot of the report from Sarawak, they were saying that after the crash, Yaakob became spooked, like really became fearful. So he kind of make a deal with Federal and say, okay, I will run with you, whatever you want to do in Federation, but you must ensure I have power in Sarawak. So you basically don't come into my territory, but whatever you do at federal level. But the thing is, the federal level covers so much more. So you may be emperor in Sarawak, but you are losing even things like royalty and natural resources. So that I think that is one of the reasons that people in Sabah and Sarawak, of course, don't talk about Singapore. Singapore already abandoned the ship. So those people who can bring balance didn't play their role. And finally, the last opposition, SUPP, also joined government. So it's like, I mean, Lara, do you agree that, we I remember when they voted to downgrade the status of Sabah and Sarawak, I think some reporter go and find who are the member of parliament. Some still alive, a few years ago. And they went to ask him, why did you vote? And I think there's one from Sarawak, I don't know. He just said, I can't remember, something like that, It's just something, as a matter of fact, Hussein On basically bulldozed away because that amendment, we call that, that's how we look at American politics, so reminded me of that because it's an omnibus. Omnibus basically is like a whole stack of law, maybe 300, 400 amendments. And American omnibus is so ridiculous, a few thousand pages, and they expect one night you can approve it. So I think something like that happened. Can you imagine you go to parliament, a whole stack, only now? It's like, what the heck? So that's the thing that happened. But Lyra, what do you think about all these things? I mean, I know we don't want to dwell on history, but I just find people don't have an appreciation of where we come from.
Yeah, I mean, this whole discussion is just so bizarre yet so interesting. I mean, it is. I guess it's really, really not possible for us to look forward without actually looking back at what has happened in the
not
past.
Too obsessed with it, but sufficiently educated,
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's just that I mean, there's just so much to brain. I mean, I guess it's really, really how we are looking at this whole thing, whereby I guess if you want to say that Yaakob Rahman was spooked, I do believe that there is a large portion that he was really, really spooked by this whole thing. And then because of that, and like what you mentioned, just because of your one course of action, a judgment call that basically decides how the whole people is going to prosper or going to actually suffer from the whole consequences. So it's really, really that portion that we're actually dealing with. So I guess in a lot of ways, we do need to wake up to reality whereby that is where we are now. But are we happy with just 300 million interim payout and even 600 million payout each? So to a lot of people will be thinking, hey, 600 million. I mean, a lot of people probably, if you look at from personal perspective, you probably don't even have like 1 million for retirement, the funds. But the thing is, if you really look at the statewide, it's really, really very, very little. We have actually given out so much. So I felt like now actually what we do need to look at is really the battle between the federal and even the state. So what would the states be looking after? I mean, if you talk about certain things whereby, in previous episodes, we have also talked about like privatization of education, privatization of healthcare and things like that. So if we could have that sort of capitalist sort of mindset whereby we look at all this thing from a business perspective, well, how is it profitable? I mean, we can do everything, but is everything like really, really beneficial? But what do we need to tackle? And even going back to like earlier on the local elections, how the people get the mandate, how the politicians actually get the mandate. So I think we really need to look at all these routes so that we bring back some of the good things that have happened and then we just move on, because otherwise we will be going down the other path where the trend is decolonization. So we also don't really want to go there also, because you'll be like, to what end? As in like even what our Prime Minister is saying about the whole Middle East war as well, that it doesn't just happen at 7 October, it happened way back. So I mean, if you want to count history, like, hey, who's the one staying there? Who's the one that is actually being the government there and things like that? So even now, I mean, with Sarawak having the leverage, so you can't say that, hey, I mean, we don't really have a choice, we don't have a card. I mean, those sort of things here. I mean, that's really just
Sarawak actually have a lot of card now.
Exactly. I mean, so you should play the trump card. I felt like Sarawakians should play the trump card, and maybe Sabahan will follow along as well. So if we will play that trump card and then we played it well, we will actually see that there is a lot of that separation of power, where we begin to see that, hey, Sarawak begins to have that. Maybe Sarawak can be the one that is leading the pathway for self-determination, and you begin to go back to really the Malaysia Agreement 1963. You say that we don't want encroachment on our freedom of religion, because Sabah and Sarawak clearly stated in MA 63 that, well, you guys can have all you want, the Islam being the official religion, but here we don't want. Here we just want like a circular, we want to be like a circular nation. So if we could go back that path and then we could play it well, I guess, I mean, that will really show the intention of GPS as well.
David, let me ask you this, because again, three of us are all Sarawakians. You see, like the recent halal issue is an issue that helps to frame the whole discussion about freedom of religion. And do you get, I mean, I get the impression, but I'm asking whether you feel the same. It's like when it comes to this kind of thing, Sarawakian and maybe Sabahan to an extent, they usually will be like, oh, that's Malaya problem. Nothing to do with us. But then it's like the halal thing are also affecting the whole country. It's not like as if it doesn't concern. Now, of course, we know in Sarawak, you can have a coffee shop with Muslim store, you can have Chinese store, you can have Indian store, you can have native food, no problem. We know this exists, but of course you start to have more and more maybe halal shop. Then you I mean, if you want to get halal certification, obviously you can't have other food type. I mean, this is the same for kosher food, juice. So do you feel there's that kind of mindset from Sarawakian that, hey, where's Malaysia? What happened there? You go and fight yourself. That doesn't concern us.
I think we cannot like look at Sarawakian as a whole one block, because last time I remember back then there's very very hot issue regarding to the plate, the lorong. That there's a Chinese word, whether there's a Chinese word or, and some of the Sarawakian Chinese, they are, this is our right. We born looking at the plate have Chinese word.
And I mean the road name.
Road name. And some of the Semenanjung people, they are like, seriously, you have the Chinese word on your plate? And we were like, this is our right. And our SMC, our Kuching, local authority, that we are so used to that. And suddenly the Chinese word disappear. So we of course we fight for that. But some of the Semenanjung people, they were like, oh, this is Bahasa Kebangsaan. But they forgot that Sarawak, we didn't gazetted the law. We didn't have the official language because back then in MS63, we have two official language, which is Bahasa and English. And now we can still see Abanjo debate in English in the Dewan Undangan of Sarawak. And I sometimes I play the clips of that debate to some of the West Malaysian friends. They are like, seriously? And for a long time, I didn't watch back to the Don't Sitting. I kind of not used to it. I'm like, is it really English?
Yeah.
I kind of feeling. But some of the Malay or some of the Melanau in Sarawak, they kind of like the Malay kind of things because this is their culture. No harm. But back to the halal certificate, actually better this is a political issue because there's a press asked the minister whether is the government considering enforce all the restaurant to get the halal certificate. As a religious minister, of course he have to say yes, we are considering. But this is the press didn't play the fair game. We can say in this case. After that, we can know, DAP, Teresako is voicing out, and UMNO we have Akmal. Again, and the DEPSI have to react, so hoo-ha. But back to the thing just now I mentioned, is Sarawak, we can see it as a block. I don't think we can see it as a block. But I will say that if you are a Sarawakian and you say this is Malayan thing, this is not responsible. Because you are in this this country, whether you like it or not, you cannot choose where you are born, but you can choose how you can react. If we just push anything to Malayan, what about one day the things come to Sarawak and we can see that slowly there's something happen in Sarawak. And if you keep saying that, Sarawak better with independence, this is actually kind of like we feel like we're getting abandoned by Singapore. We feel we get sim already. Is it whether we doing the same thing to Malaya as well? This went both sides, You can say Semenanjung, they threaten you, they bully you. But is this kind of situation you also neglect those non-Muslim you care about in the West Malaysian? Why you Sarawakian, even you are non-Muslim, you are superior than the non-Muslim at West Malaysian? I think we have to think about that. If you want to fight for freedom of religion, let's look as a whole block. We are not a Sarawak nation yet. But in the future, we don't know. But we have to take the responsibility.
Correct. And the reason I mentioned this is because, I totally agree with you. And that because my point of view is very similar to you, that if we want to really come into the reality of a multicultural Malaysia, it cannot be done without the East Malaysia. It cannot be done. But of course, you look at the name, Sarawak for Sarawakian. The name already kind of implies some kind of separation. Then of course, just in general, and you get people who feel like we shouldn't be involved. But I totally agree with you that people should look at it and come from the mindset of profit. If West Malaysia is doing well, you will be blessed also. It's like don't have this kind of separatist mindset, which of course this is decades of politics that happen. And you also mentioned about is it the right time to fight? Kind of suddenly reminded me of 1992. Remember when Joseph Piring, so Jeffrey's brother, and at that time they won the state elections and they announced they are leaving BN, So but that actually, so very quickly after that, with money and things like that. They bought over a lot of people. And the government, I think, was within weeks was changed back to Barisan Nasional. And the worst thing was that this opened the door for UMNO to come into Sabah. So I think people look at that example, and that's why today you look at Sabah. Sabah is like what? Wild, wild west, right? The politics is so messed up. But hey, let people decide and let people have a whole process of self-determination. Now for the... I know we kind of go all over the place, but one or two points I want to cover before we end, and that's the preview like we talked about in the last episode. It's the whole concept of self-determination and decentralization. So let me share. One of the things we do in this program quite a lot, and it is we talk about American politics because of our interests. Like I have this interest. But also because we feel, now of course we are Westminster system, we are British, very different. But one of the things about the American system, and I want to use this as a point to discuss self-determination, is from the beginning they have small government. So right after Washington's, then you have Jefferson, Madison, all these people, they start to have a whole very hot debate. Should we become more of a federation? Should we have more federal power? But Thomas Jefferson was very against that because he's the third president. And so they fight, and eventually he won. So he was really credited with not creating a very centralized power. So you see for the first 150 years, all the way leading up to, even after Civil War, American government hardly is big government. Like give you one example. 50 years after the Civil War, the industry they step into the industrial age, and they do steel and things like that. So they had one steel factory, and then suddenly people were on strike because they were forced to labor for 12 hours. So people were on strike, and then people don't want to work, and then start to have some fighting and injury, and even one or two people died. And the government said, we don't know what to do. We had no military. The federal government have no military. And eventually they had to go and hire some militia, like security guard. So that was how small their government is. But because of small government, you had Rockefeller, you have JP Morgan, all these entrepreneurs. The freedom and creativity, of course, then capitalism always go the other extreme and dominated. So today you look at American capitalism is the other extreme. Wall Street, people look at Wall Street, they are disgusted. So it seems like there is a sweet spot that we have to aim for. Enough freedom for self-determination, but some guideline. Okay, so with this, a few questions from me, and I want both of you to comment, and we kind of try to finish with this. At the moment, do you agree that we are too centralized, our power? That's question number one. And number two, if so, what can we do? We want to end this episode with a kind of pause. In fact, we did talk about that in the last episode, but due to technical error, it was kind of not recorded. So first question first, do you think we are too big of a government, and what can we do about it? And then second thing is really in the spirit of self-determination, decentralization. Of course, David, you mentioned some of the things. Sarawak government say English is official language. For people who are not very good with BM, it's a big news, right? I worked in Sarawak for many years. The court use English. The interpreter use English. And I used to remember magistrate transfer from West Malaysia. When they come here, they were like trembling. They don't know how to speak. And from time to time, the senior lawyer will be like, this one. Like teach them what to say and what to do,
Okay.
Yeah, it's so interesting, But anyway, enough side try. Okay, maybe we start with you, Lyra first.
Sure. Yeah, from the get-go, I think, even the Reid Commission was saying that, we need to have a strong central government. So I think that is always the basis for Malaysian government. So I think since day one, it has always been a lot of emphasis on the central government, because I guess where we have started off from was really the whole the independence for Malaya first. So I guess because Malaya is a very different kind of I mean, you do have to look at Malaya as a whole block together. I mean, in that sense. So because of that, I can understand why they do need like a strong central government. But when you have like equal partners coming in, so I guess that's where we do need to look at it from a different kind of perspective, because you are talking about different kind of partnerships. So even just like business transaction and things like that, you do have like different partners who have like different kind of shareholding. So in terms of that, you do need to look at it from that perspective, whereby, hey, who's the managing director, who's the CEO, who's the CFO, and things like that. And if we could look at it from that perspective, and I guess that's where we could begin to have that sort of decoupling of power. So how do we move from like a strong central government to decentralization? So again, I felt like, I mean, even just like interestingly, where our Prime Minister is asking Sarawak Premier to like educate, quote unquote, educate the West Malaysian parliamentarian about like, hey, using the use
green
of hydrogen.
energy.
Yeah, green energy. I mean, if we could use that, I mean, although it sounds like a joke, sort of, I mean, when you think about it, actually it's not so bizarre as well. I mean, if you could have like that sort of technology transfer and things like that, you could maybe see how we could actually downsize. I mean, I felt like there's no other way but except to downsize the civil service first. I mean, of course, we have the essential. I mean, if you can have essential services working only during COVID era, so why not the essentials only, you know?
Maybe we need a commission of efficiency.
Exactly. I mean, so if you can have that sort of really, I mean, looking at the efficiency, the performance, you could really.
Actually,
really
Najib
cut
used to
out
have
a
that,
lot
you
of-
know?
Exactly. I mean, he's all about transformation and things like that. So I guess there is like, I mean, UTC is a great invention.
And in fact, a lot of people kind of say that was a good move from him, and there was more accountability, and even people like KJ, they all were involved at that time. So I guess there were some good things that happened.
Yeah, I guess if you keep people on that sort of, I wouldn't say you're like walking on glass shells, but if you could come to that place whereby it's not just like it's a guarantee that you will work until you retire and then you'll get your pension
Iron
and
rice bowl.
things like that. Yeah, I mean, people will be more, I guess, more driven to actually be accountable for what they need to do. So if you could even just start with accountability, I think accountability in the civil service, then you could begin to even chart a pathway through to decentralization. So I wouldn't say we can straight away decouple from a strong central government, but you have to start somewhere. So I guess really giving that huge payout to have that fixed deposit by gaining more supports from the civil servants, I don't think that's a great idea. I mean, not saying that they shouldn't be well remunerated. I mean, they should. If the performance says so, then they should. But then they should keep to the KPI, and then but you also need to have that sort of accountability structure because again, we are too communal that you can be like buddy, hey boss, you know, like economy is a bit tight, inflation, blah blah. I mean, you shouldn't really think from it from that perspective. But if you could just like look at the performance, then give an increment that is give credit to where credit is due, then you could begin to see how there are other ways to help, really helping the poor. You really separate the two initiative because in workplace, when you're doing work, it's not a charity. I think people need to have that sort of mindset that it's not a charity. I mean, if you want to do a charity, you form a foundation. You don't form a company. I mean, running civil service is also the same. I mean, like you're running a company, we can have that sort of efficiency, and then I guess maybe that's where we could begin to like, if every department is very, very efficient, I guess we could begin to even think of how Trump is doing it, as in with every introduction of new policies, you need to throw away two redundant policies. I think even just basic things like this, then you could begin to slowly streamline all the things, and you don't have too many bureaucratic processes. Maybe people will be more nimble. Yeah.
Wow.
So what about you,
Interesting.
David?
Back to the topic that's what I mentioned about America. America originally is a small government. It made me think about where Malaya or Malaysia came from. If we compare Malayan Union and Malayan Federation, actually I think the union kind of concept is more decentralized, and it just
Interesting.
there 2
The
years
name even.
after demonstration, after all the hoo-ha, and we are now not clear about what has happened then.
Yep.
And based on the history, I think some of the Chinese nationalists that then they are like fighting for we want to live in this land. We are proud of being Malayan. This kind of thing. But much of them are still recognize China as their motherland.
Yep.
But some of them are actually they are encouraging people that if you are staying in Malaya, this land, why don't you just become Malayan? That's it. So back to the point just now, I think Malaysia, we are keeping ourselves in the cycle of fear. Although we have the separation of power, we have independence of legal or whatever. But just now, as what I have mentioned, that every time the most important point in the history, something happened, emergency, someone being jailed. That critical moment, if we can get out of that cycle, maybe we can create another cycle. Because it's all about balance. Just how you mentioned that capitalism in USA, that they built USA until how great they are right now. But we are not worshipping capitalism.
Yep.
But in Malaysian case, we are too, how to say, we are too not there.
Too controlled.
Yeah,
you know,
we are too controlling.
Yeah.
Every time we have
no innovation and freedom.
So
I think we're on the other extreme.
Yeah, we are in the other extreme. Like USA is like too far
Too
away.
free also, you
too
have that problem.
free. You can express yourself even you are doing criminal.
Yeah.
Maybe. And in Malaysia, we are like, oh, we have to behave. And suddenly, if you want to change government, then something happens. So not blaming all the Malaysians, we have that kind of hope deeper because we are too getting used of. At that kind of moment, suddenly something happened and things doesn't go the way we want. So if we can get out that cycle, just like last episode I mentioned, actually this is a very new country.
Yep.
So if we want to hope this country to become more mature, we have to get out of that cycle. Just now, like what I mentioned before, that I think Malaysia is in the puberty period. Yep. In puberty, we have to make her a room to test and trial. This is a process, and you have to learn how to take care of yourself, how to self-motivate, how to self-believing, have train for your confidence, and to have more discerning. But if you controlling them, just like if you want to nurture a child become an adult, through the adulting period, if you don't let go, you are still too controlling. What do you expect that adult become? This is like giant baby, or like that. So
correct.
If we want to let Malaysia to explore her true potential, I think to some extent, this is my dream. You have to let go of something. Maybe we cannot be too controlling and maybe we cannot be too fearful. It's like, if government didn't jaga you, I will lose my job. So what? There's so many private sector. So what? So many overseas company. And now we can see after ringgit becomes stronger, that many multinational company get into Malaysia. Go get your chance to try. Why you need to stay in your comfort zone? I mean, this is we cannot blame everyone. We both have our weakness point. We have a weakness, but why you want to keep yourself in your comfort zone? Instead, you give yourself a try. So I think we can give Malaysia a try in our future.
Yeah, that's a really good point. You know, when you talk about we are in puberty, right, or you know the teenager, and that's the time, you know, teenager got definition. You are 13 to 18, and that's the time the child begin to experiment, right? Begin to explore new things, begin to be given more discretion to make decision. So of course, in that period, definitely will have more screw up and things like that. So I think that's a really interesting point because we, you know, if we allowed this kind of freedom, less control, then of course you will see some messes, which is okay, you know. And you know, one of the recent episodes, of course, this is maybe for some people it's a very minor issue, but again, our Minister of Truth, Fahmi, right, came out and say, you know, government want to redirect DNS. And see, to a lot of people, what is DNS and things like that. But actually, what happened is they want to redirect to they want all the internet service provider to have their own DNS. Basically, they want to be able to control. This is step one of creating the Great Wall of Internet. You know, the Great Wall of China? Internet, not the physical wall, which basically they filter whatever can come in and out, controlled by the government. So this is step one. But then this goes totally against what Economic Minister Zafrul was saying about we wanted IT investment. And that's why the backlash actually behind the scene later I found out was an economic backlash. Because a lot of people wanted to invest in Malaysia, say if you do this, we're not coming in. So do you see the U-turn? This is like one of the fastest U-turn ever. So this is a good example that if governments can look at what will cause us to prosper, maybe by just letting go a little bit, our economy can prosper. Maybe by letting go a bit, people will appreciate that a real progressive. We use a literal term progressive, not the leftist progressive, right? And people will be like, hey, the government is good. We can continue to support. Because one of my concerns is, especially with PMX now, is what he is doing with the strongman kind of attitude. He is losing his core supporter, And that's not funny because he's trying to fight with Perikatan. You already have a group of people who doesn't want progress, which is fine. In every country you have this kind of competition. But you can't afford to lose. Like he cannot afford to lose Sabah and Sarawak. That's why Sabah election is very critical, right?
Yeah.
I think, would you agree that the 300 million announcement is tied to the state election?
Probably, highly probably.
And Muhammad Haji was standing next to him, right? Look at the photo op and things like that. So, yeah, it's very interesting. Anyway, but I think one other point, and just very quickly, I think we're kind of running out of time already. The one point I kind of mentioned in the last episode, in terms of self-determination, we use Undi 18 as one example. It wasn't... And I think that's maybe a great illustration of your going into the puberty stage.
Yeah.
And I think nobody expected the result, right? Yeah. And people kind of blame Undi 18 for green wave initially. I don't know if the data still support, but you can say that there is some relationship because the younger generation Malay, especially in East Coast and Northern part, are supporting PN. I think that's a fact.
Yeah.
Nobody can deny that. So it's part, and maybe just this point, because you are all kind of like, okay, Lyra, you're a bit older, but David, you are kind of approaching 30s already. When people are young, right, 21, 22, they tend to be more radical. They tend to be more experimental.
Yeah.
Then when they start to kind of, have boyfriend, girlfriend, get settled down, and they start to think, oh my goodness, I have to feed my child and things like that. Then common sense start to flow into. So in the last episode, you're talking about, one of the things you talk about is discernment and common sense.
Yeah.
So maybe to end with this, and how do we encourage common sense? I mean, just 1 or 2 points, or how do we encourage discernment? It's like,
I mean,
personally, this is a personal question. There's no right or wrong.
It's more like question.
like if you want to persuade someone to make a decision that you feel is best for the country, how would you do it? How would you help them?
Actually, back to your questions, as there's some people accusing or they are labeling that the youngsters are not aware of political development. I don't agree.
I think they're much more aware.
Maybe they are much more aware than when we are young.
They
are exposed in the social media and anything. And there's another accusation that they are too easier influenced by the social media. Yes and no. But undeniably that they are the one who can absorb the information the quickest among the history. So we can see from the election result, let's say that if you say voting for PAS is not common sense, then after few elections we can see that people have more common sense because they are not voting for PAS anymore.
Yeah.
We can see the trend. But what if for them voting for PAS is common sense because PAS jagain the etc. This is just a hypothesis lah. But back to the thing just now you mentioned a common sense lah. I think maybe the generation right now, the Zen Alpha, they are the one who can face this kind of up and downs, the real quick one. Because for me, it's like too much information sometimes. Even for my boss, for my dad and mom, they are like, we didn't get used to it, but they are born as in this
They're fully
situation,
digital.
fully equipped by this. So why not we let the bullet fly few more seconds, then we can see in Chinese we say 让子弹再飞一会儿. We can only that we can judge whether they can have more common sense or not. Because I think for them, because most of the country like right now, maybe the economy is not good, but if we compare with the history, it's actually better. But when they have this kind of they are well equipped in money, in prosperity, they know what they want to choose. Maybe they can have a better choice. Maybe it's just we are too pessimistic of them because our concerns are different. This is my point of view.
Yeah, actually, it's very interesting because you will consider yourself like Y generation. That you are
Zen
millennial.
Z.
Are you Zen? Maybe you're old Zen, but
old Zen, yeah.
But Lyra will be millennial, and I was just reading one kind of research. Of course, all these things you have to take it with a grain of salt. And they were saying that the millennial were the most pessimistic generation. And the reason, and in fact, millennial, based on their statistics so far, is a generation with the least, it's a generation that doesn't want to have kids. And so they kind of link that to pessimism, because when you don't want to have kids, it's because your outlook of the future is very negative. And I think one of the things that, David, you mentioned is really because the millennial probably is the first generation that is being thrown into the fully information, digital kind of thing. And maybe there were not a lot of guidance and things like that. Then the other thing, of course, if you compare millennial and the previous X and baby boomer, the prosperity is just very different. So a lot of millennials are really struggling because, and that's why now some of them, when they become rich, they'll be like, well, I'm not leaving my inheritance. You see more and more people declare things like that. Whereas my generation and older, almost always they will say, they will leave it to the next generation, unless you are super filthy rich, like Warren Buffett, it's like, it's just obscene to give that kind of money to one person. So I guess, David, from what you're saying, the feeling I get is we have to try to understand the generation. And in the same way, and go back to the whole halal issue, and it's really, yes, people have their point of view, but it seems like there's a distinct lack of desire to understand each other. And that's why we're at where we are. Yeah. But Lyra, what's the one, we kind of running out of time already, but maybe just one or two quick points. How would you, maybe common sense is a wrong. What would you do to encourage people to continue the fight for a better Malaysia?
Well, I guess like what you mentioned in terms of the pessimism, I think it really comes from the place where you don't have any hope anymore. So it's really, I guess, because I would say millennial is also the generation that is most entitled as well. Because, they have not really suffered a lot of hardship because of the hardship that the previous generations have gone through. And because of that, we are kind of like quite sheltered from all these things. So when in fact all this thing, like a lot of warfare that comes, lawfare, information warfare that comes along our path, then it just becomes like, wow, overwhelming. So, but even then, I felt like we will still be able to discern, having that sort of discernment in terms of, I like how Jack Peszta was saying it. The first step to communism is really, you make us unhuman. So I think in a lot of ways, I think like what you mentioned also, in terms of like for some people, it could be common sense to vote for PAS, which I totally, agree. That's your right to vote for PAS as well. That's also some other people's right to vote for any other political parties that they felt like most representing them. Because at the end of the day, you vote for the vote based on your conscience. So
Yeah.
I think, but how do you have that sort of conscience and even discernment is really based on how you are guided by your own respective religion and even faith as well, and even how you are seeing and having an overall outlook with that sort of hope. So when you have hope in whichever things that you're believing in, I guess you will be more guided, I think, to make a well-informed choice and things like that. But having said that, I felt like the government shouldn't be legislating morality because that's really the first step of like you taking away how people begin to think, how people begin to process certain information and based on their conscience. Because if you start to legislate morality, what you're doing is you're really encroaching into people's conscience, and people don't work in a certain way, but they are just kind of like being robotic in certain how they are behaving and how they should be like conforming to the whole thing. So if the government would be just so careful to not legislate morality, because I think the whole issue with halal certification is really legislating morality. I mean, if you don't go into that territory, I think basically we are fine. If everyone is free to profess their own faith and things like that, I think we will see a more prosperous Malaysia.
Now, it's interesting, I think we're going to finish with this already, that when you go back to the original constitution in 1957, the freedom of religion portion specifically mentions worship, but also education. So it's interesting because how you educate people is what they will come out to be. So if you have a lot of religious school, and that's one of the reasons why people will feel like, hey, this is normal. This kind of thing should be there. But of course, people will argue, we have the SRJC, and people say it's against unity and things like that. I mean, to me, it's okay. You want to, we are Chinese. The Chinese, especially when they are overseas, they tend to want to maintain their culture. They don't want the next generation to lose. So they'll go to Mandarin school and things like that. But then they don't impose that on the people. In Australia and US, you can't say, you all must speak Mandarin, you all must take the Confucius mindset. No. So it's really, I think it's okay. You look at America, look at Australia, the Italian, the Jews, they have their own community, their food and things like that. But nobody is dominating the politics. So that's the thing that, I just hearing from both of you, and I just suddenly come to my mind that we have to divorce the religion from politics, because it wasn't supposed to be like that if we go back to MSCC3. Yeah. But of course, it is a long road ahead, but the self-determination of Sabah and Sarawak, I believe, is going to be one of the first steps. So, 16th of September is coming out, so happy Malaysia Day.
Happy Malaysia Day.
Happy Malaysia Day.
So I think that's all we have for today, but we cover so many things, and some of the things we need to revisit again. But it's like, every time you think about this kind of topic, you just kind of feel a bit mind blown, right? It's like, can it even be done? But we have to remain hopeful, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's it for now. So if any of the things we discussed, you would like us to kind of go take a deeper dive, then drop us a message or a comment, and we'll be glad to do more.
Yes.
Okay, so bye-bye for now.
Bye-bye.